Andrew Marangos inflicted the worst physical and multiple injuries a police officer had ever seen after he attacked a man in his 60s. The man has been jailed for almost 30 years after he repeatedly stabbed an associate and left him for dead in a bid to rob him. Andrew Marangos, 43, of Broadlands Avenue, Enfield, was found guilty of attempted murder and 2 counts of possession of an offensive weapon in a public place at Snaresbrook Crown Court on Tuesday, 6 December. He was sentenced immediately afterwards to 28 years' imprisonment. He must serve 2/3 of his sentence and cannot be released without permission of the parole board. Detective Inspector Paul Ridley, from the North Area SID, said. This was a complex investigation adopting a range of technical and sophisticated policing techniques. It was imperative that Marangos was found before he could harm anyone else. The victim sustained some of the worst physical and multiple injuries I have ever encountered in a case of this nature, and it was miraculous that he survived. Marangos is a very dangerous individual and an acute risk to the public, which is reflected by the sentence handed down by the judge. He clearly intended to kill the victim, exemplified by the sheer brutal and sustained force he used, armed with 2 dangerous weapons, and leaving him for dead. It was through the tenacity shown by Case Officer Detective Constable Neha Chadha and her supervisor Detective Sergeant Senator Asen that ensured Marangos was convicted. The court heard that the victim, aged in his 60s, had met Marangos on several occasions since October 2021. On Tuesday, 11 January, just after 1810 hours, the victim picked Marangos up from his home address in Broadlands Avenue. The victim drove to Swan Way and pulled up. Marangos began looking through his pockets purporting to look for cash. The victim found this strange and suggested the cash might be in his top pocket. Marangos then hit the victim on the left side of his head with a metal bar, knocking him unconscious. While the victim was unconscious, Marangos stabbed him 17 times, 16 times in the back of the head and the neck and once in the right lung, puncturing it. The victim regained consciousness and realized he was badly injured as there was blood all over him. However, he did not realize he had been stabbed until the police told him. Marangos was shouting "Where is it?" attempting to rob him. The victim still had his seatbelt on in panic that he could not move, so he honked his horn in a bid to get help. Marangos ran around to the driver's side and again asked the victim where the drugs were. The victim told Marangos to search the boot properly. Cars were going by unaware of what was happening, and so to try and get their attention, the victim dangled his legs out of the car and shouted for help. Marangos rushed over to the driver's side and rammed the door against the victim's leg several times. The victim asked Marangos how he was going to get away with it, and he replied, "Don't worry, you're not going to be around to find out." The victim debated about telling Marangos where the drugs were, but he believed Marangos would murder him as soon as he had the drugs in his possession. At that point, Marangos fled from the scene and a member of the public who was driving by called the emergency services. The victim was rushed to hospital with life-threatening injuries and received emergency surgery. The victim's leg had to be amputated as a result of the attack. Detectives spoke with the victim and he told officers that his attacker was called Andy, but he did not know his full name. Officers examined the victim's phone and identified Marangos as the suspect. They attended his home address on Thursday, 13 January, and recovered clothing with the victim's blood on it. Later, they found shoes that corresponded with the shoes seen on CCTV of a person running away from the scene. The weapons used in the attack, a metal pole and a butterfly knife, were found near to the scene of the crime. Other CCTV footage reviewed by officers showed Marangos in a supermarket just an hour after the attack, calmly buying alcohol and painkillers. Officers also established that Marangos' mobile phone had been discarded or switched off immediately after the attack and not used since, in a bid to cover his tracks. Marangos was taken to a North London police station and answered no comment to all the questions put to him. Following the sentencing, Detective Inspector Paul Ridley from the Metropolitan Police North Area SID described Marangos as a very dangerous individual and an acute risk to the public. He added, "He clearly intended to kill the victim, exemplified by the sheer brutal and sustained force he used, armed with 2 dangerous weapons, and leaving him for dead." Marangos must serve 2/3 of his sentence and cannot be released without permission of the parole board. Our thoughts are very much with his victim, and their bravery in coming forward is commended. I hope they now get some closure with his sentencing.